Have you ever walked into a room, smiled at someone, exchanged polite words, and yet, deep in your gut, you felt something was off? Not dangerous in the obvious sense, no glaring eyes or harsh words, but something deeper, something unsettling, like their smile didn't quite reach their soul, or like they saw through you, not at you. That chill you can't explain. That's not paranoia. That's your psyche ringing an alarm bell you've never consciously heard before. SHI, one of the most profound minds in psychology, spent decades unraveling this invisible thread that connects people not through love or friendship, but through something far more insidious. He discovered that some individuals carry within them unconscious forces so powerful, so distorted, that even if they appear charming, spiritual, or perfectly normal, they are living in a reality where you become the enemy. Not because of what you've done, but because of what they've refused to face in themselves. And here's the twist. These aren't just toxic people. They're not overtly aggressive or abusive. In fact, many of them are the ones who seem most together. They might be leaders, teachers, spiritual guides, or even your partner, but beneath their polished surface lies a hidden war zone, a war between who they think they should be and who they truly are. And in that war, you become collateral damage. Today, we're diving deep into the psychological red flags that SHI uncovered, signals so subtle that most of us miss them until it's too late. This isn't about labeling people as evil or broken. It's about understanding the unconscious mechanisms that shape our relationships, influence our decisions, and sometimes quietly destroy our peace. So if you've ever wondered why some people leave you feeling drained, confused, or strangely off-center, even when they say all the right things, this video is for you. Because once you understand these patterns, you gain something incredibly powerful: clarity. Let's begin. The hidden war within, shadow projection. Imagine this: you're having a conversation with someone you trust. Suddenly, they accuse you of thoughts you never had, motives you never considered, emotions you've never felt. And they do it with such certainty that for a moment you start questioning yourself. Did I really mean that? Did I really act that way? But no, you didn't. What you've just experienced is one of the most dangerous psychological phenomena SHI identified: shadow projection. The shadow, according to SHI, is the part of ourselves we reject. Every time we say, "I'm not like that," we push a piece of ourselves into the shadows. We bury it, deny it, pretend it doesn't exist. But those rejected parts don't disappear, they live on in our unconscious, growing stronger, waiting for a target. That target, often it's someone close to us. When someone projects their shadow onto you, they're not reacting to who you are. They're reacting to a distorted version of themselves that they can't bear to see. So instead of facing their own anger, jealousy, manipulation, or fear, they see it in you. And worse, they believe it. This isn't a lie. It's a delusion, a deeply convincing one. And it's what makes shadow projection so dangerous. Because when someone sees you as the embodiment of their darkest self, they won't just avoid you. They'll fight you, convince others of your guilt, justify betrayal, all while believing they're protecting themselves from you. Sound familiar? If you've ever been accused of being the villain in someone else's story without understanding why, you may have encountered shadow projection in its purest form. Ego inflation, when goodness becomes a weapon. Now imagine another scenario. Someone who radiates light, who speaks in wisdom, who seems almost enlightened. They talk about healing, awakening, compassion. They wear the mask of goodness so well that it's hard to question them, until something happens that feels off. They lash out over minor disagreements. They dismiss criticism with divine authority. They make you feel guilty for doubting them, not because they're angry, but because they're convinced they're right. Always. This is what SHI called psychic inflation, a condition where the ego becomes inflated by identifying with archetypal figures like the savior, the enlightened one, or the divine voice. Unlike simple arrogance, which is easy to spot, psychic inflation hides behind virtue. It disguises itself as truth. And it's dangerously seductive because it gives people a sense of cosmic purpose. They're not just flawed humans anymore. They're chosen, guided, righteous. SHI warned that this state is not only dangerous to others, it's devastating to the person experiencing it. Because when your identity merges with something larger than life, you lose your humanity, your humility, your capacity to grow. And when that happens, any challenge to your worldview becomes an attack on the universe itself. Inflated egos don't debate. They convert, they condemn, they preach. And they attract followers who crave certainty in a world full of ambiguity. So how do you recognize psychic inflation? Look for the absence of doubt, the inability to question, the refusal to admit error. If someone acts like every word they speak is carved in stone, sealed by heaven, then you're dealing with someone who has lost touch with their human core. And that's when the danger begins. The perfect mask, persona possession. There's another kind of person who walks among us, one who never says the wrong thing, never shows vulnerability, always fits the role they play. They seem flawless, polished, impeccable in every interaction. You might admire them at first, envy them even, but after a while you notice something strange. There's no depth, no contradiction, no imperfection, just perfection. And that's when your instincts start whispering, something's wrong. This is what HEN called persona possession, when someone becomes so identified with their social mask that they forget who they really are. The persona is the image we present to the world. It's necessary for functioning in society. But when it becomes the entire self, something vital is lost. Authenticity. These people have sacrificed their inner truth for acceptance, and in doing so, they've created a void inside. A hollow space filled with everything they couldn't show the world: their rage, their loneliness, their shame, and that void doesn't stay buried forever. Eventually, it erupts. Marie-Louise von Franz, one of HEN's closest collaborators, described how people with perfect personas often experience sudden, explosive breakdowns, moments where the mask cracks and the shadow spills out uncontrollably. These eruptions can look like emotional meltdowns, impulsive betrayals, or shocking acts of cruelty. Because when you spend years pretending to be perfect, the pressure builds up, and when it finally breaks, it explodes. So if you know someone who seems too good to be true, ask yourself, what are they hiding? And more importantly, what happens when they can't hide it anymore? Archetypal possession, when spirits speak through flesh. The mask that eats the face. HEN wasn't just another philosopher or psychologist, he was a seeker. He wandered through temples and libraries, spoke with monks and mystics, and studied ancient texts that most people had long forgotten. But unlike many who came before him, he wasn't looking for enlightenment or salvation. He was trying to understand something much darker. What happens when we stop being ourselves and become something else entirely? He believed that beneath our personal thoughts, fears, and memories lies something deeper, a shared layer of the human mind that connects us all. Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious, but HEN gave it a different name, the collective veil. To him, this veil wasn't just a concept, it was a living thing, a psychic field filled with powerful forces known as archetypes. Archetypes are the old patterns that shape how we see the world. They're the hero who fights for justice, the mother who protects, the trickster who breaks the rules, the sage who seeks wisdom, and the shadow who holds our darkest impulses. These aren't just roles we play, they're energies that have existed since the beginning of time, and sometimes they take over completely. That's what HEN called archetypal possession, when a person stops acting like an archetype and starts becoming one. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. You've probably met someone like this. Maybe it's the coworker who always plays the martyr, suffering endlessly no matter how much help is offered. Or the friend who can't stop rebelling, even when there's nothing left to fight against. Perhaps it's the leader who speaks like a king, demanding obedience as if their word were law. These people don't just act like these roles. They live them, breathe them, become them. And once that happens, something else steps in. It might sound like superstition, but cultures across the world have recognized this phenomenon for centuries. In ancient Greece, the oracle at Delphi would inhale strange fumes and speak in riddles said to come from Apollo himself. In shamanic traditions, spirits would enter the body of a healer, guiding their hands and voices. Even today, people report hearing inner voices, not voices of madness, but distinct presences offering guidance, warnings, or commands. Some call it intuition, others call it psychosis. HEN called it possession. But this isn't about demons or exorcism. This is about psychology, the war between the conscious self and the ancient forces that lie beneath. He saw the same stories repeating over and over again throughout history. The rise, the fall, the blind certainty, the tragic end. He once wrote, "The man who believes he is chosen by fate ceases to choose. The woman who hears the voice of the mother cannot bear to leave her children. The warrior who hears the drumbeat of Mars will fight until there is nothing left to conquer." Each archetype has its own pull. The hero wants glory. The lover seeks union. The sage searches for truth. The trickster thrives on chaos. But when one of these pulls becomes too strong, the person begins to orbit around it like a planet caught in the gravity of a black sun. There's no longer choice, only destiny. SHI documented many cases, some real, some drawn from myth. There was the monk who believed he had become Bodhidharma, refusing food unless offered in ritual. The politician who thought he was Napoleon reincarnated, planning secret wars in his head. The mother who refused to let her child grow up, trapped in the eternal embrace of the Great Mother. All of them had lost something vital, their ability to question themselves. Possession doesn't hit you all at once. It sneaks in slowly, like fog rolling in from the sea. At first, the person seems more confident, more inspired, more powerful. They feel connected to something bigger than themselves. They speak with clarity and conviction. But then things start to change. They begin to ignore contradictions. They shut out criticism. They can't handle uncertainty anymore. They divide the world into absolutes, good versus evil, right versus wrong, pure versus corrupt. They stop listening. They stop learning. And eventually they break. Because archetypes aren't kind. They're not moral. They're forces of nature. The same energy that brings compassion can also justify cruelty. The same power that gives insight can also bring blindness. When someone is taken over by the warrior, they must keep fighting even when there's no enemy. When someone becomes the victim, they suffer endlessly even when help is offered. When someone becomes the judge, they condemn without mercy even when love is present. Robert Moore, a Jungian analyst, described this as the tyranny of the complex. Once an archetype takes hold, it creates a loop. Every action reinforces the identity. Every reinforcement deepens the possession. The person becomes a puppet dancing on strings woven from ancient myths. Moore warned that the most dangerous people weren't those ruled by fear or greed, but those ruled by certainty. Certainty kills reflection. Reflection leads to freedom. So what happens when a person loses that? SHI believed that archetypal possession was becoming more common in the modern world. With the rise of mass media, celebrity culture, and the glorification of single identities, people were more likely to lose themselves in roles they never meant to play. People didn't just follow leaders, they became them. They didn't just admire heroes, they became heroes. And in doing so, they gave up their humanity. One story SHI often told haunted his students. A young man came to him claiming to have received divine visions. He spoke of uniting the world under a new order. He had no doubt, no hesitation. He believed he was chosen. SHI listened quietly. Then he asked a simple question. "Who are you when no one is watching?" The man paused. Then he screamed, not in pain, not in fear, but in confusion. Because he couldn't answer. He had lived so long inside the role, the prophet, the chosen one, that he no longer remembered who he was underneath. SHI watched as the man collapsed to his knees, sobbing. "I don't know," he whispered. "I don't know who I am." That, SHI said, was the final stage of possession. Not madness, not violence, not even belief. It was erasure, the complete disappearance of the self. And when that happens, the archetype doesn't vanish. It simply waits for another host, for another soul willing to play the part, to be continued. The compulsion to repeat, trapped in the past. You know someone like this. Maybe you are someone like this. They keep ending up in the same mess, same heartbreaks, same fights, same betrayals, different faces, but it's always the same story. Every time they swear things will be different. This time they've learned. This time they're ready. But somehow it never works out that way. SHI saw this pattern again and again. He knew it wasn't just bad luck or poor choices. It was something deeper, something running on automatic. Early experiences, especially painful ones, leave invisible tracks in our minds. And once those tracks are there, we follow them without even realizing it. Psychoanalyst Christopher Ballas called these unthought knowns. things we know deep down but never actually think about. They shape how we act, who we choose, what we expect from life, and we don't even notice it happening. Modern brain science backs this up. Trauma doesn't just live in memory, it rewires the brain. The mind starts looking for what feels familiar, even if it hurts, even if it destroys, because to the brain, safety is whatever it already knows. And here's the hardest part. People caught in these patterns often drag others into their cycle without meaning to. They recreate the same toxic dynamics, the same power struggles, the same emotional wounds, the same cycles of abandonment. It's like they're acting out a play written long ago, and everyone around them becomes a character in it, whether they want to or not. To them, it feels like fate, like they were always meant to end up here. To you, it feels like getting stuck in someone else's loop, one you didn't sign up for. Because once you're pulled into it, you're not just a friend, a partner, or a co-worker anymore. You become part of a script you never agreed to, playing a role you didn't know you'd taken on. Breaking free isn't as simple as trying harder or wanting change. It takes awareness, real, honest awareness, the kind that makes you look back at your past and ask, where did this start? What am I repeating? And why? This compulsion shows up everywhere, not just in relationships, but in careers, friendships, even small habits. People keep falling into the same traps, choosing the same type of partner, quitting jobs the same way, losing money the same way, sabotaging success just when it's within reach. It looks like self-sabotage from the outside. From the inside, it feels like home. That's because these patterns started early. Often in childhood, when survival depended on adapting to a parent's moods, a sibling's behavior, or an unpredictable environment. A child learns, if I stay quiet, no one yells. If I fix things, maybe love will stay. Those lessons get locked away in the nervous system, buried under years of growth and experience, but still pulling the strings. Even as adults, those old strategies keep showing up, not because they work, but because they once kept us safe. HEN had clients who came to therapy desperate to change. They brought journals filled with affirmations, downloaded meditation apps, read every book on personal growth. But within weeks, they'd be right back where they started, fighting with the same types of people, making the same mistakes, feeling the same pain. One man swore he'd never fall for another emotionally distant woman, only to find himself chasing someone exactly like his last girlfriend a few weeks later. Another client left a job that made her feel trapped, only to create the same stress and pressure in her new workplace. It wasn't failure, it was repetition, an unconscious pull toward the familiar, even when it hurt. And it's not just big life moments, it shows up in smaller ways too. The person who always misses deadlines even though they're organized. The one who keeps getting into arguments over the same issue. The friend who pushes people away just when things start to get serious. From the outside, it seems irrational. From the inside, it makes perfect sense, because the brain has already lived this story before. Ballas described this as part of the unthought known, a hidden library of knowledge formed in childhood that guides behavior without ever reaching conscious thought. We don't think about how we learn to survive conflict or rejection. We just do it, and once those behaviors are wired into our brains, they become default settings. Like muscle memory, but for emotion. Neuroscience confirms it. Trauma changes the brain. The amygdala, responsible for detecting danger, becomes hypersensitive. It sees threats where there are none. The prefrontal cortex, which helps us reason and make decisions, gets overridden by instinct. That's why people say, I knew better, but I couldn't stop myself. That's the compulsion talking. It's not weakness. It's not laziness. It's a hijacking of the system by something older, deeper, and more primal than logic. And what makes it worse is that it distorts reality. When you're stuck in a loop, everything bends to fit the story. A neutral comment becomes proof of rejection. A moment of distraction feels like abandonment. The world doesn't match your internal script, so your mind reshapes it until it does. And then there's the way it drags other people into the drama. People caught in these cycles often unconsciously assign roles to the people around them. If you grew up with a parent who was emotionally distant, you might attract partners who do the same. If you were the family caretaker, you may pick people who need saving, or worse, people who take advantage of your kindness. These roles aren't random. They're echoes, repeats of old wounds, played out again and again. And since the people involved don't realize they're acting, they believe their choices are real, that they're following their hearts, making decisions based on logic or love. But beneath the surface, something else is steering the ship. For the person stuck in this loop, breaking free feels impossible. Every attempt at change meets resistance, not just from the outside world, but from deep inside. The psyche fights unfamiliar ground because it fears what lies beyond the known. Even pain becomes comforting when it's familiar. New possibilities feel risky because they haven't been tested by trauma or time. That's why healing isn't just about changing behavior. It's about going back to the beginning, to the first time this pattern showed up, to the moment it got locked in. Who wrote this script? What were you trying to survive? What did you learn that no longer serves you? That's the hard work, the necessary work. It takes courage to face the past without flinching. It takes strength to revisit wounds that have long since healed over. But until those wounds are acknowledged, they'll keep bleeding into every relationship, every choice, every future. And for those caught in someone else's loop, a partner, a friend, a coworker, it's important to see what's really happening. You're not just dealing with the person in front of you. You're stepping into a story that's been playing out for years, maybe even generations. Their behavior isn't about you. It's about something much older. That doesn't mean you have to stay in the role they've given you, but it does mean you need to recognize it. Set boundaries. Protect yourself. Don't let your own peace become collateral damage in someone else's inner war. Because the truth is, most people won't realize they're repeating until they hit a wall, until they lose someone they love, until they fail at something they thought they could control, until the repetition finally hurts more than the idea of change. Until then, they'll keep walking the same path, hoping for different results. And the tragedy is, they'll keep believing they're choosing it. But they're not. They're just reliving it. The path forward, integration over illusion. So you've just gone through some pretty heavy stuff. You looked into the darker parts of your mind, faced things most people avoid, and now you're probably asking yourself, is there really a way out of this? Is there hope? The good news is yes, there absolutely is. But it doesn't come from pretending everything's fine or trying to be perfect. It comes from something deeper, something real. It comes from integration. Now, when we talk about integrating your shadow, we're not saying you need to become some enlightened, flawless version of yourself. That's not the point at all. The goal isn't perfection, it's wholeness. That means accepting that you have flaws, that you carry pain, that sometimes you act out of fear or anger or shame, and that's okay. Because everyone does. The difference between someone who grows and someone who stays stuck isn't whether they have darkness inside, they both do. The difference is whether they're willing to look at it. There's a quote by SHI that goes like this: "I would rather be whole than good." At first glance, that can sound a little dangerous, like he's saying morality doesn't matter. But that's not what he meant at all. What he was saying is that honesty matters more than image. Because when you start bringing your hidden parts into the light, your fears, your wounds, your insecurities, you stop needing to blame others for them. You stop seeing people as enemies just because they remind you of something you hate in yourself. And when you stop doing that, something shifts. You start growing in real ways. You begin building real relationships with others and with yourself. You start changing not because you're trying to be someone else, but because you finally understand who you are. And if you know someone who's walking this path, you'll recognize them right away. They admit their mistakes without falling apart. They listen more than they judge. They don't oversimplify complicated situations. They live with contradictions and don't freak out about it. They still mess up. They still get frustrated or angry or sad, but instead of running from it, they sit with it. And that makes all the difference. Let's break this down even more. A lot of us spend our lives living unconsciously. We react instead of respond. We make decisions based on old wounds we don't even realize are still active. We push people away without understanding why. We repeat patterns without knowing where they came from. And a big reason for that is because we're afraid to look inside. We think if we acknowledge our flaws, we'll be judged. Or worse, we'll confirm that we're broken. But here's the truth. Everyone has those parts. Everyone carries some kind of wound. Everyone has impulses they're not proud of. The only difference is that some people choose to face them. And when you do that, you start taking back control. Integration starts with awareness. Not a one-time aha moment, but a daily practice of paying attention to your thoughts, your emotions, your reactions, your triggers. At first, it feels uncomfortable, maybe even painful, because facing your shadow means looking at the parts of yourself you've spent years hiding from. But once you do, something changes. You stop needing to pretend. You stop needing to impress. You stop needing other people to tell you you're okay. You start living from a place of truth, not performance. And that's freeing. Think of it like this: the shadow is not evil. It's just misunderstood. It's made up of all the traits and feelings you were taught to reject, whether it was sadness, anger, vulnerability, sexuality, selfishness, laziness, or even ambition. Whatever it was, you learned early on that showing it wasn't safe, so you buried it. But just because you bury something doesn't mean it disappears. Those parts of you still influence your behavior. They shape your choices. They affect how you treat people even if you're not aware of it. For example, imagine someone raised in a family that valued strength above all else. If they were told that crying was weak, they may have stopped allowing themselves to feel sadness. Over time, they disconnect from that part of themselves entirely. As an adult, they might struggle to connect emotionally with others. They might seem strong on the outside but feel empty inside. They might wonder why they can't form deep bonds even though they want to. The problem isn't them. The problem is that they've disowned a piece of themselves. So the solution isn't to try harder or fake it better. It's to go back, dig up that buried part, and learn to accept it again. That's integration. So how do you actually start? First, you become aware of your projections. Projection is when you take something you don't like in yourself and see it in someone else. Like if you feel insecure about your intelligence, you might assume everyone thinks you're stupid, even if they never said anything like that. Projection keeps you stuck in conflict. It keeps you blaming others. It keeps you blind to your own stuff. To break free, you have to pause when you feel triggered. Ask yourself, is this really about them, or is this something I'm carrying? That's not always easy. Sometimes the answer hurts. But once you start recognizing your projections, you gain freedom from them. Another step is learning to hold complexity. Being human means being full of contradictions. You can love someone deeply and still hurt them. You can want peace and still feel rage. You can be kind and also selfish. These aren't signs that you're broken, they're signs that you're alive. Many spiritual paths focus on rising above these dualities, but if you skip over the hard parts, you end up bypassing real healing. Spiritual bypassing looks like using meditation to avoid dealing with grief, or repeating affirmations to numb your loneliness instead of facing it. It gives the illusion of growth while leaving the real work undone. True integration doesn't skip over pain. It dives into it. It lets you hold both the light and the dark. It teaches you that wholeness doesn't come from erasing parts of yourself. It comes from making space for all of them. One of the most powerful results of integration is becoming a wounded healer. Carl Jung talked about this idea that the best healers are often those who have walked through their own suffering and come out stronger. Not because they're perfect, but because they're real. They've felt pain, so they understand it. They've struggled, so they can relate. They've made mistakes, so they don't shame others for theirs. That's why people are drawn to them, not because they have all the answers, but because they've done the work. And maybe most importantly, they show others that it's possible. In a world obsessed with curated lives and filtered images, authenticity is rare and incredibly powerful. When you say, "I'm not perfect, but I'm trying," you give others permission to be real too. When you admit, "I messed up, but I'm learning," you create space for connection. This is what real community looks like, not agreeing on everything, but sharing the same humanity. As you grow more integrated, you also become less reactive. You start developing what some call emotional sovereignty, the ability to stay grounded no matter what's going on around you. You no longer need people to fix you or validate you because you've found that stability within yourself. Does that mean you never feel pain or frustration? Of course not. You're still human. But you don't let those feelings run your life anymore. You learn to ride the waves instead of drowning in them. One of the biggest gifts of integration is learning to witness yourself without judgment. You start observing your thoughts and behaviors with curiosity instead of criticism. This creates space, a gap between what happens and how you respond. From that space, you can choose how to react, Not just default to old habits, not just blow up or shut down automatically. You can pause, breathe, reflect, choose. That's where real power lies, not in controlling others, but in mastering yourself. And let's be honest, this journey isn't linear. There are days you'll feel like you've regressed. Old wounds will resurface, triggers will catch you off guard. But each time you return to something with more awareness, you transform it. What used to control you now becomes a teacher. What used to scare you now strengthens you. That's how you reclaim your power, not by erasing your past, but by understanding it. Not by rejecting your pain, but by honoring it. Integration also changes the way you relate to others. You stop trying to fix people. You stop expecting them to meet every need you have. You start seeing them for who they really are: flawed, beautiful, growing humans just like you. You stop putting people on pedestals or pushing them away when they disappoint you. Instead, you offer presence, compassion, understanding. And in doing that, you help create deeper, more authentic connections. Because now you're not trying to fill a void with someone else, you're coming from a place of fullness. And that makes all the difference. Maybe the greatest gift of integration is inner peace, not the absence of problems, but the presence of alignment. You feel okay even when things aren't perfect, even when you fail, even when you fall short. Because you know that you're a work in progress, and that's enough. You stop chasing validation because you found it within. You stop waiting for happiness to arrive later because you've learned to rest in the now. You stop hoping someone else will save you because you've taken charge of your own healing. That's the path forward, not toward perfection, toward wholeness. And it's open to anyone brave enough to walk it. Final call to action. Awakening starts with awareness. So now that you've seen the signals, ask yourself, do you recognize any of these patterns in the people around you? More importantly, do you see them in yourself? Because awareness is the first step toward transformation. If this video resonated with you, if it helped you understand a relationship, a situation, or even a part of yourself you've struggled with, then hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. And if you want to continue this journey of self-discovery, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Because we're diving deeper into the Jungian universe, exploring the hidden layers of the psyche, the power of dreams, the meaning of synchronicity, and how to reclaim your authentic self in a world full of masks. Remember, the road to consciousness is not easy, but it is worth it. And it starts today with you.